Okay. This is being recorded, so if anybody doesn't want their faces online, stop your video, but I hope that isn't the case with anyone. Couple little plugs, ongoing, upcoming events. Rehoboth Beach Museum Beach Ball. Can anybody see that? No? That's okay. Anyway, it's a drive and dine, and it's on October 23rd, and please, if you're interested, go onto our website, rehobothbeachmuseum.org. We also have our next program upcoming, will be an outdoor program on October 28th. It will be about the shipwreck, the Faithful Stewart. And we're going to have a historic reenactor reading from his diary of one of the survivors. So it's kind of interesting, and we have fun afterwards. So with that, let me let a couple more people in, and okay, with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. Today we are doing, in their own words, a little bit south of Rehoboth. We're going down to Dewey, and we have Will Burbank will be here, and he will be here later for questions and comments if you wish to stay for that. And if you have thoughts while the program is airing, please use the chat group and we can go on from there. Let me see if I can find where I belong. Okay, could you hold on 1 minute while I let some people in again? Okay, and let me change the screen view because I've got, otherwise you're never going to be able to see this whole thing. Well, I've got to stop that right now. And some of you who are on here are used to me making mistakes at the very beginning, so please bear with me while I bring up the correct screen share. No, okay, so, okay, let me go back to the correct screen share. I don't know why this is giving me this problem today, but are you seeing it now?
Got it. Thank you.
Can you hear it?
No.
How's that? Better?
Our family has come down at least once to Rehoboth, and we joined cousins coming from all over the country, and continuing a tradition that was set in place by my parents, and before that, my grandparents. who first came down to the area in 1906, and by the 1920s they had bought their first cottage in Dewey Beach. They paid $225 for oceanfront property, which I get it was a good deal then. I don't know, it would be an incredible deal now. But but to understand, Dewey was a very, very different kind of community in that day. It was also very different from Rehoboth. My grandmother, Burbank, was very involved in the Methodist Church, and of course, this Rehoboth was known as historically as a camp meeting site for Methodists. And but Dewey was a much more rugged place at the time. It did not have paved roads, it did not have water, it did not have electricity, it did not have sewage, but it had the beach, it had the ocean, and the elements are still there. So they built or acquired, I don't know if they built or acquired, but their first cottage was very, very rustic. And if I may share, I actually brought somewhere.
We can add those later.
I can't hold this up. This is a picture of.
You can.
Okay, if that's harmful, then we will not do that.
It's upside down.
So
It's just too hard to read on a video.
Okay,
so we
got
can
it.
get a good picture of it.
Okay, we'll get it. Anyway, this was the cottage. It looks kind of like a hillbilly thing, but it was, a beachhead at the beach. Beachhead at the beach. My grandmother Burbank lived in Baltimore. Her husband was in the canning business, and they apparently had the ability for her to come down and spend most of the summer down here. And the way they would get down here was the way many people from Baltimore did at the time. They would take a ferry to across the I don't know if it's Chesapeake Bay at that point, but end up on the eastern shore and then take the train that would come all the way through Lewis and then down into Rehoboth, going down Rehoboth Avenue. And then once she's off the train, getting down to Dewey was not that easy at first. I have seen pictures of them using an ox cart to get down, so it was quite the venture. Today, of course, we get to deal with massive traffic jams, which are also a challenge of a different sort.
Did they talk at all about how densely or sparsely populated Dewey was in the
Incredibly sparsely populated. So, and that was true even when I came across. Though it had largely, it had changed. But initially, you could, there were large gaps between the cottages. The cottages tend to be very modest, single-story structures, whatever. My grandmother started with this ramshackle cottage, and then and they got another cottage that they bought, which had been a building that was used by the Coast Guard. They as people used to do a lot, they would move it from somewhere else down, plop it down on the sand, and then eventually they had the resources to actually build a cottage. So they moved that one that they bought to the back and built a very, very nice but very modest cottage. The amount of property that they had apparently was about an acre, which which would be beachfront. It's like I can't even fathom what that's worth today.
Do you know the date that they actually built the new cottage?
I believe I don't know when their ultimate cottage was built. What I do know is that a key element was a chimney that was made from the rubble from the Henlopen Lighthouse collapse, which many houses did around there. And that proved, what we're told, pivotal, because in the '62 storm, that was an anchor that kept the cottage in place. I mean, it was a very, very heavy, very massive fireplace, and it was a key element of what they built.
As long as you touched on it, let's talk a little bit more about any stories you heard about the '62 storm.
Well, I remember the '62 storm. I wasn't here, but it was utterly transformative. It changed everything up and down the shore. We learned about it because my sister saw a story at the front page of the New York Times of the collapse of the Atlantic Sands Hotel. Not the partial, but part of the structure had collapsed. That was a big picture. And my gosh, this was an incredible event. We got down here as soon as the public was allowed in, and it was essentially under martial law. You had to go through checkpoints with military people with guns and making sure they didn't want to have looters. We got to our cottage. I should say at this point, the original cottages that had been owned by my grandmother, after she passed, they were then, the property was divided up between my uncle, my aunt, and my father. So we subdivided into threes. We all had our own structures by the 1960s. And then after we got down to see what had happened, we were stunned because they were all there, but they were all changed. And the big thing was that massive amount, the tide had come in and apparently brought water and massive amounts of sand. The cottage that my grandmother built, which was named Linger Long, just a cute cottage, was filled with sand, literally, I think, probably within a foot or two of the ceiling. So the entire first floor was filled with sand. And I remember, going through the broken windows and crawling along this bizarre thing.
This may not apply to the early days of the cottages, but can you give us a sense in today's terms what streets the cottage was located in?
The cottage the address was Van Dyke Street. So it's the southern part of Dewey. And it would be essentially the oceanfront lots of Van Dyke, today of which is home to, a whole complex of condominiums.
And your grandparents' names?
Her name is Leila Burbank. Leila, Leila. Burbank. Mm-hmm. You're going to ask me her maiden name, and
Norris.
I believe it was, in fact, Norris. And you're gonna okay.
Your grandfather.
And my grandfather was Leonard Burbank.
So then let's go to the next generation. Your father and his siblings.
So my grandparents had three kids. My father, who was the eldest, was William Everett Burbank. And could be wrong, but I believe the second was his brother, Leonard Norris Burbank. And then the daughter was Lydia.
Mary.
Mary Burbank.
So around what years were you first brought here? Were you brought here as a baby?
So I am going to be 72 in about a month, and I've been coming almost every summer for 70-some years. There have been a couple years, one for whatever reason. But I'm sure I came here as a baby, and probably first touched the ocean when I was very, very young. It took a while to become comfortable going out into the ocean, but I always loved playing in the surf. Rehoboth to me was the beach. It was the dunes that you could climb up and slide down. It was digging holes and burying people. All the classic things that kids to do. But there were some things that we could do that I unfortunately have passed. I loved having big campfires, cookouts on the beach, and I think you can do it, but now you have to get a permit. But it was a regular part of the experience. We would go off crabbing on the bay, the Wilson Marina, which was one of two or three marinas that you go out. Playing with my cousins, just very simple things. So by the time I was along, we had electricity. We did not have public water, so it was, and the water that we had a pump that would flush toilets and whatever, but for drinking and cooking, one of the routines was to, when you arrived at Rehoboth, going to a place which in fact may be this ice house or former ice house right here, where there was a spigot. You could fill up big bottles with water that were then take down, fill up the car and take, and that's what you use for drinking. Waste, they didn't have for garbage pickup for a long time, so the custom in my family was to find a section of the yard and dig a big hole and put the waste down there. Eventually, that waste, the cans would rust and the bottles would break, and so as children, one of the challenges moving about the sand was not cutting your foot on an old rusty something or other. The other challenge were these things that I just had to look up, but they were called sand bears, or the sand burrs, which are little cactus-like balls that if you step on them, it makes your foot very unhappy. My grandmother was aware that they were not good, and that the beach, the grasses on the beach were making it hard for her to see. So she would pay her grandchildren to go out and pull out the grass, which she thought was a good idea. But today, now we know it was environmentally exactly the wrong thing to do. But she would, she was trying to improve the beach as she knew it. She also built what was reportedly a very primitive but effective boardwalk on a section of Dewey, so that you could walk along planks and visit neighbors and not step in burrs and get stuck in the sand. So.
Who were some of the neighbors that you remember?
Growing up, when I was there, our immediate neighbors were my cousins, and then there was a family called the McNabs the next street down. They were a minister and a dentist.
Could you say that name again?
McNabs, capital MC, capital N-A-B-S. The Reverend McNabb, and they had a couple of kids. But when we would be down there, one of the really neat things was just being there and meeting other children, frequently similar ages, and having new friends, and for a week. There was one house on Van Dyke that was much more substantial than any of the other houses, and it was owned by the Derrickson family. And I believe Mr. Derrickson may have been a state elected assemblyman or whatever in Delaware would be the legislature, but he was a very important person, and he had a very significant house that he would rent out, and families that would come to that frequently might have a cook or something. So it was a different group class of folk in terms of their status. Our family was very, very modest, and the cottages were thus, but
You mentioned the games that you would play or the things that you would do. Do you remember what kinds of meals would you eat?
You'd always have corn. Sometimes my mom would go out to whatever fruit stand or whatever. There used to be a very nice stand out in Nassau, far beyond 5 Points, where you can buy fruit. But she was always doing healthful things like that. A lot of cookouts, and I don't remember much. Scrapple, of course. This is where we would come to have our fill of scrapple, which is an acquired taste, but our cousins had a scrapple breakfast this morning. It's part of our ritual to come down to Delaware and cook a bunch of this stuff that I think is better than the Scottish haggis, but not a whole lot.
When you were very young, let's start when you were very young, were there any stores or restaurants?
There were. So in Dewey, the most notable wasn't a store. There was So there was a variety store called the Wilson Variety Store. Same family, I believe, that owned the pier. And there was the Bottle and Cork, which was a bar, and a little, in my family, a little risque because they served alcohol. These were good Methodists, and they did not believe in drinking. But the Bottle and Cork had been there and was very much there. The variety store, however, was important to me as a child because one of the things I would do is try to assemble money by picking grass or whatever, or picking up broken bottles and whatever we could do to earn money. And then if you got enough money, then your money maybe a quarter or 50 cents, then you could walk down to the store and buy a comic book. Or in those days, you could buy a root beer for 5 cents, which was very nice, actually, very, very special. And that was just neat for kids because we would have a trip out to the store, and we were able. It was not yet so crowded in traffic that it was dangerous for children. We could walk down the beach and get there. Rehoboth was the big city. It was far and distant. We knew it was there, and maybe once, if we were down for a week, maybe one time we would go down and go to the boardwalk, and that was a very, very special thing. Or ice cream, we would go to the big city to do that. But it was mostly, we were right there in that cottage, and it was sun, sand, and surf.
So what changed about the teen years when you came to Rehoboth or when you hung out in Dewey from your childhood?
So the storm in '62 was changed the whole community. Other big things that changed it was the second span of the Bay Bridge, which brought in many, many more people. Just the population started growing. Dewey went from this being very quiet, backwater, sort of rural kind of thing to a much more bustly place. As in my teen years, I remember it being suddenly more and more groups of people that would have loud parties. It was a very different temperament than our family had known. And then that of course, after the storm and a lot of the cottages being destroyed, they were rebuilt or else replaced by condos, so the population greatly increased and completely changed that whole sense of that place.
I think it makes a difference when you're an owner versus when you're a visitor, and clearly your family owned property for a long time. Were there any sort of civic associations or political affiliations that your family participated in over time, or were you here for such a short time that wasn't really?
So they were not involved in the political governing. I think they were at a neighborhood level, and my parents retired here, so they were involved in the church. They had a...
The name of the church?
So they would have been, they were involved in the Presbyterian Church, the Westminster Presbyterian Church.
Here in Rehoboth.
Here in Rehoboth. And they had a cottage on Scarborough Avenue. No, excuse me, they built a house on the Scarborough Avenue. It extended right where the lake sort of bends. So it's an extraordinary view of the lake. They had a very happy few years here as in the retirement years.
Okay, so they were here in Rehoboth and not Dewey.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Although is that technically Rehoboth? I guess it is.
Scarborough Avenue
right.
extended, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
One other memory I'd like to share as kids, because I think this was really changed. We talked about having to get your own water or whatever. Another thing that was very much a presence growing up was it was very mosquito-y down on Dewey, and the way they dealt with that was they would regularly come by and sort of essentially gas the community with probably DDT. I remember this being done by planes, sort of crop dusters. My cousin remembers the trucks coming around. Any way you count it, it was not a good thing for the birds and the overall environment. But those mosquitoes were pretty tough. The other thing I remember It was very much a presence. Was just south of Dewey. There was it was still under control of the Army, and they would every summer have exercises and shoot off huge, very loud guns. So all those area where the observation towers and everything, that was all under the control of the military, as was the area that is currently the Henlopen State Park. That was, of course, Fort Miles. So on both sides of the community, you had the Army. As a kid, this was very exciting to me. My father was not in the military during World War II, but most of my friends' parents had been, and that always seemed like a really exciting thing to do. And suddenly seeing the Army and jeeps and hearing guns and whatever was all very thrilling. And one of the favorite things as a child to me was to have toy soldiers and little plastic jeeps and pretend we were having battles. And this, of course, is all completely different from my current values, which is not at all militaristic or wanting war or whatever. So things change when you evolve. So.
Any other family names that you remember? We did talk about Reverend McNabb's, or any other family
and
names?
the Derricksons. So the other interesting family, we didn't know them as family, but they were a presence in the community. There was, at the end of our street on Van Dyke, was a little gift shop, and there was a character, a gentleman named Freddie Vogel. And he sold antiques, but he also was knowledgeable about local history, and it was there I learned about these wonderful coins that one could collect at this beach a little south of there from a shipwreck that I guess had gone down in the 1600s, and that's a whole other story I'm sure that you probably know about here at the Historical Society. But when I learned that these coins were available, you could go to the shop and actually see what he had collected, but several times I went down after storms and found coins myself. And this was before we had metal detectors, so finding a coin just on your own was a lot of effort and more than a little bit of luck. But it was so amazing to find this thing washing up from the ocean, that from a sunken ship. I should also say, I was always fascinated by the thought of shipwrecks, and we had right near our cottage the remnants of what had been probably a barge, but we imagined it as a ship. There were timbers and big spikes and whatever, and I think it was a barge that had washed ashore and ended up on the dune. And we spent hours and hours imagining we were on a ship. In Rehoboth, there was also another wreck. I don't know if that's still there, but there were very sharp metal pieces that we were always warned that one should be aware of. So.
For me personally, I think that we think of the environment more in a coastal community because we're closer to nature in the first place.
Absolutely, yeah. Can I add just one add-on? Being close to nature, one very positive development that I just absolutely love has been the opening of the Gordon's Pond Trail and the Breakwater and trail and the trails that go to Cape Henlopen, and you can now get out in nature and see birds and the salt marshes, and it's just incredibly nice biking, cycling, and I've done that literally every day I've been down here. I go out there. That didn't used to exist, or it was there, but it was not accessible, and it's been a really positive change.
Well, I thank you so much for coming out and talking to us. This is new information to me. We are looking to broaden our representation of different perspectives, and certainly we don't have a lot from Dewey and a lot from many years ago. And we'll talk after this, but thank you for coming.
Well, thank you for doing. And I'm really happy that the Historical Society is doing what it's doing.
Oh, that was wonderful. We have quite a few comments in the chat. And Will, are you here with us? Will Burbank?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, I can hear and see you now. Okay. This is from Mary Pat Ford. 6 years ago, we rented this cottage. It was lovely, so much so that we bought a place in Dewey. I first visited Dewey when she was 16. These are mostly comments. Oh, one thing I was going to ask, because I saw earlier, whose birthday is it?
It was my birthday yesterday.
Oh, happy belated, and thank you again for coming.
Thank you.
Lynn Drawbridge said she and her husband were married at the Little Wedding Chapel in Elkton and had their honeymoon in Dewey in 1979. So, yeah. Charlotte Burbank, eating at Rehoboth Restaurant in the 1950s would be a really big deal. Usually we went to the Dinner Bell Inn. Let's see what else we have. Go back up here. We have hello family from California. We have family from Baltimore. We have, and then we have some other people who've all said hello. Okay, well, I'm gonna, what is going on in everybody's neck of the woods today? And Uncle Will, what side of the country does neck of the woods come from?
And writing from California, I don't know if you can hear us. This morning, the New York Times had a piece that a series of questions, and depending on your answers, they could do an approximation of what part of the country you come from, that having to regionalism. So that was what she was commenting on.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Oh, and she's Googling it now. And actually the phrase comes
I believe
from
how good your family is with technology.
Yeah.
a strip of land in Britain. It refers to land on both water on both sides, but early Americans used it to mean a settlement in the woods. And Carol Ann remembers stepping on portions of the fence that would be mostly buried. I'm assuming she's talking about your waste solutions back in the day. And she loves to scrapple. So does anyone want to unmute themselves? I'm perfectly willing to let everybody sort of just come on. And Charlotte, unmute yourself.
Hi, I'm the one that lives in California. So as much as I love my cousin Will, he needed to plug in some years when he was talking about various things. So for example, the big house that eventually got built from scratch, but ended up with 4 feet of sand after the '62 storm, that was built in 1930. And many of the cabins that were previously on the property, like Will alluded to, had all been moved. They were all structures that were elsewhere in the Metro Rehoboth area and then had been moved. And I believe, like Will said, the first one was moved onto the property. And my understanding is that we got what was called squatting rights. Now, this is before Dewey was even close to being incorporated, but that's how my understanding is that we actually were able to acquire the acre of oceanfront property because we had been squatting there with our cabins that we had moved onto the property for years. And so that, and it could be that the Historical Society might know the absolute correct answer, but that was just a fluke that we kept going down to that particular section with all the shacks that had been moved. And there was one other thing I wanted to, our grandmother Burbank was born in the late 1880s, and she died in 1952. So that gives you some context as to when the property then got split up between the 3 kids that she had shortly thereafter. And I believe each child got about a third of an acre, more or less. And not to be too fine of a point on it, the birth order was Will's father was the oldest. He was born in 1905. And then came Lydia, who was born in 1908. And then came Leonard, the youngest kid, who was born in 1910. So that kind of gives you some context of how early everybody was going down there. And it definitely was a group of people, a lot of our family friends of our grandparents from the Baltimore area, cousins, relatives, all coming down in the before World War I, and then into the teens and 20s, and then were able to, quote, squat onto the land and acquire the acre on oceanfront. So those are my 2 cents. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Charlotte. Will, any comeback to that?
No,
He's muted.
I think you're muted, Will. We can't hear you right now. No, you're still muted. No, I think Charlotte's doing something to you. Okay, now we can hear.
My mother, Joan, is on the Zoom, Will's older sister. She might have something more to add. She's 10 years older. I don't know if she can unmute and wants to add anything, Mom.
Joan?
Remember during the war and the soldiers on the beach, and
Yeah.
you would go to see Sister Carolyn,
Right.
and you had to sneak down there to see her,
Yeah.
because the soldiers were patrolling the beach after, during World War II.
Sister Carolyn was a nice friend. She told good stories and we loved going down to her. We also like to go to the boardwalk and maybe get some popcorn or something and maybe have one ride. But Rehoboth, I have so many good memories of.
Sister Carolyn was a Lutheran deaconess,
Yes.
and she lived in Baltimore. They knew her in Baltimore, but she had a cottage very close to Grandma's. So
She was 2 cottages down, about maybe 3, along the beach.
So I wanted to say, can people hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
So though we had this wonderful set of cottages and properties, eventually all those were sold over time. Nobody in the family has any property remaining in Rehoboth or Dewey. But interestingly enough, we still come back. We come back from California, from Colorado, from Chicago, from Boston, from Washington, from Baltimore. My wife and I come from upstate New York. It's just remarkable that this magnet continues pulling us all there. And we typically will rent a cottage and coexist for a week or so and enjoy.
Well, that sort of speaks to how much happy memories you all must have.
Yeah.
From this place. And so if no one else has any other, is that Charlotte again?
Yes. So what will also, we actually reassembled this for the last 2 weeks of August this year in a house on Newcastle Street. We rented a house. We're boosting the economy of Rehoboth. So there was a total of about 15 or 20 of us cousins, not all at the same time, but in this house. And the ages ranged from 80 to 5. And it was 3 generations plus. And we've been doing this almost every year since we were coming down as kids ourselves. So that's the really good part, is that Rehoboth is able to accommodate us. Thank you, Rehoboth Beach. And we were able to find a rental that's big enough that, when we get goofy and decide to all try to come down at the same time, we can do it. And thank you, Rehoboth Historical Society. I think this is so great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I wanted to say that.
One last question.
Lynn,
One
did you?
for Carolyn. Where in Baltimore did your grandmother live?
Will, could you hear that?
So she lived she lives on Warwick Avenue, which is in West
Warwick
Baltimore,
Avenue.
but I don't know the exact neighborhood. Perhaps somebody else.
The exact neighborhood.
Yeah.
Isn't
There
there,
was
isn't there a
school,
university
and
that?
it's Raleigh.
It is currently home to
Coppin State.
Coppin State.
Okay.
And in fact, the campus literally took over what used to be your house. So
Great, thank you.
I just wanted to say that when I moved here to retire a couple of years ago, I donated some postcards that I had in my possession of aerial shots of Dewey Beach. And I took them in to donate them to the museum, but I wanted to find someone who could show me what was what in these aerial photographs, because I couldn't find even where our honeymoon was in 1970, you know?
Yeah.
And so far I haven't hooked up with anybody. I've got a handful of pictures from my honeymoon. We stayed in little white cottages, which are no longer there. And in fact, we did a lot of fishing, and we had one of those porcelain sinks in the backyard of our cottage where we cleaned our fish. You know, you don't clean your fish in Dewey Beach anymore. But I've gone all over Dewey and I can't find the street we were on or anything. It's kind of disheartening. I'd like to
Yeah.
at least be able to find that.
Yeah, that would be fun to go back and see it. I know I had some ties to Dewey back in the late 70s, early 80s, and it's really such a change now to drive down there and see.
Mhm.
It's so different.
Yeah.
It's changed so much that you
I was
just
disappointed. I just couldn't even figure out what street we were even on. I know it was one of the streets that ended at the beach, but
yeah,
couldn't find it.
yeah. Well, that's true. Most of them did. Most of them did. So,
Yeah.
any other comments, thoughts? Well, Will, I want to thank you and all of your family for coming and being here. And thank you for doing this oral history. I really think it's important that we're expanding a little bit down to Dewey. It's a part of our area. And I really think this is like a first step to that. And hopefully we'll do many more. So
thank you.
any last words from you, Will?
Thank you. And again, I want to just reinforce that I think it's wonderful to do oral histories. I know you have others that are going to be online, and I encourage people to go to your website, check them out, and contribute if you have something that in your unique history that you'd like to add.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, and one other thing I wanted to say, when you were mentioning going down to Coin Beach, that actually is the program we're having at the end of October, is the Faithful Steward, which is the ship that wrecked down there and spilled all the 400 barrels of English pennies and halfpennies. So anyway, so I'm glad you were able to get some before they were all gone. All right. Thank you all for coming, and hope to see you again. Check out our website and the upcoming programs.
Thank you.
Goodbye now.
Bye. Thanks, Will. Thanks, Marge.
Thank you.
Everyone. Should we have a sub Burbank Zoom next? I could start one and invite you all. Yes?
Sure, you want to do it?
Karen says no, huh?
Well, whoever wants to
we're missing something. We have to leave now to go to something.
All right. Well, I could start one and invite whoever wants to go if anyone wants to.
So Caroline,
Fine.
Should I start my own Zoom on my own Zoom and invite you?
Thank you.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.